So I finally tried Avowed in the year of our Lord 2026. Now this is one of those titles that I simply never got around to, but with the recent news that the studio behind the game, Obsidian Entertainment, is moving on from Avowed, at least for now, I decided to try it out to see if Obsidian and Microsoft aren't shooting themselves in the foot here. So, was it worth it? Well, it's complicated. First off, I do want to mention that the version that I've played is the updated version in 2026, obviously, and as far as I've heard, this version is far superior than the launch version of the game, so my expectations were somewhat raised. Now, starting a fantasy game and immediately being greeted by a giant setting asking if you're too emotionally fragile to look at a polygon spider is a great way to set the mood. Now don't get me wrong, spiders are awful, they have zero respect for personal space and way too many knees, but the amount of caution here just made me snort. That said, there are a lot of cool accessibility choices here, which is great, but spoiler alert, the bugs are the least scary part of this game. Once you get past the menus, the opening hand-drawn cinematic is actually quite nice. And when you get to the character creator, you can instantly feel the old-school Bethesda and Obsidian heritage bleeding through the DNA. It gives you all these unique lore-heavy choices like the scaly Aomua, or the Orlans, which look like a genetic accident between a werewolf and a woodland fox. They're small, fuzzy, and very weird, but since I have the creative vision of a wet piece of cardboard, I bypassed all these exotic fantasy choices and did what every RPG veteran does when faced with infinite possibilities. I picked a standard human female. I like my bread plain, thank you very much. Now the creator is actually surprisingly good, which I didn't expect, though it lets you customize godlike features that look less like a divine blessing and more like a severe dermatological emergency. For example, you can have crystalline protrusions or flower horns erupting from your head, but it was a bit too much flavor for me, so I stuck to my unbuttered slice of bread of a character. Now the first thing I noticed after waking up on the beach was that gorgeous water. 10 out of 10. So I did what any respectable person would do and dove headfirst into the sea and saw a bunch of fish swimming around, which would have been interesting if you could actually catch them or interact with them. But you can't. They're just background decoration, which is your first subtle hint at how the rest of this world operates. Now before you can even appreciate the scenery, you get assaulted by giant tutorial boxes telling you exactly how to play the game. And to me, this is one of those ultimate gaming sins. Instead of throwing text at the player's face, a modern, great game should always lead you through the world by putting you in situations where you have to explore and learn the mechanics yourself. But that's more of a personal preference than absolute truth. And once the game finally lets you play, the melee combat actually feels really smooth. It's a little bit floaty, yes, and if you've been playing high-octane action games recently, the lack of noticeable hit-stop effects makes the sword swings feel barely noticeable when they connect. But it does the job. It's functional, like a reliable toaster that only burns the edges. As I was running around trying out my weapon swings, I accidentally swung at one of those cute little rainbow monkey creatures idling on the path and killed it. And I felt terrible. Sorry buddy, I just wanted to see if it was possible to kill you. And it was. Which is a good thing, so your sacrifice was worth it. For science. Anyway, as you push deeper into the fort here, you run into a bunch of dead knights covering the ground. There is blood splattered everywhere, but there's no decapitated heads, no broken armor, and nobody has actually been ripped apart. It all looks kinda goofy and sanitized. That's a -1 point right there, because if I'm playing a dark fantasy game, I need some heavy gore and some actual grit, not just red paint on the floor. Anyway, at some point after this, I started to realize that the exploration so far had felt incredibly linear, but I didn't think too much on it, and sooner or later I found myself at some prison cells holding a smuggler named Allura. When I spoke to her, she immediately started insulting my appearance. This bitch. Now, my character is hot as hell, so I wasn't about to take that line down. The dialogue gave me a highly aggressive prompt that let me say, "Will you shut up or should I make you?" which felt pretty fantastic to pick. The furry blue guy on my team instantly got nervous and tried to warn me that smugglers are full of shit and she will betray us the second she gets the chance, but I decided right there and then that I was going to listen to this woman and set her free anyway. Not because I trusted her, you see, but because I desperately wanted to see if she would actually backstab me later so I could have a legitimate excuse to kill her. Unfortunately, navigating the actual conversation to let her out required clicking through 3 minutes of sterile dialogue about soul plagues and imperial logistics, which made me completely forget why we were even there at the fort in the first place. Now, after surviving the fort dialogue, we finally made it to the port of Paradise on a big boat, which introduces us to the local authority, Captain Cindric. She actually seems pretty cool, and maybe I would have liked her if her play-doughy skin texture and robotic facial animations didn't make her look like a malfunctioning animatronic from a 2011 theme park. And that's where I started noticing it. You see, the conversation system here highlights a major uphill battle for the game. Coming out in a post-Baldur's Gate 3 world, these dialogue scenes feel rapidly aged. It looks slightly better than Starfield, sure, but it still has that stiff, sterile Bethesda feel where the camera aggressively locks onto an NPC who stares blankly into your soul while yapping and flailing their arms. It's kinda like trying to have a serious conversation with a Chuck E. Cheese robot. Had it been 2011, this might have been charming, but it's not. So, it's not. At least Kai is here to save the day. Listening to his gravelly, laid-back voice actor Brandon Keener, I realized that if I had a nickel for every time this man played a blue-green scaly companion in an RPG, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it is interesting that it's happened twice. Also, I'm just gonna call him Garrus from now on, because Kai is entirely too generic for a legend. Now, fast forward to a few hours later, once you get past the Paradise Gates and start exploring the city, that set dressing feeling that everyone and their mother has been complaining about on the internet really started to sink in. The town design is incredibly generic, the soundtrack is completely unmemorable, and there's almost zero structural world reactivity no matter where you go. At one point, I literally ran past a crime scene and casually stole the murder weapons right off the bloody ground. The guards just stood there, gave me a generic line of dialogue, and didn't even attempt to attack or arrest me. And this is just one example of many where Avowed shows very little reactivity. It unfortunately makes the world feel like an empty movie set rather than a living, breathing place. Set dressing. Even the script itself seems to suffer from accidental time travel. You see, I met 2 vendors named Vultur and Daggerda, and I was immediately allowed to ask Daggerda what caused her marriage to break up, even though absolutely none of them had stated they were married. The game is actually psychic, and it does this often, where you get contextual information about something that you haven't even seen or asked about yet. It almost makes it feel like the scripting is running faster than the game somehow. But then you buy a couple of flintlock pistols and a blunderbuss from the married couple, and the combat yanks you back awake. You see, dual-wielding swords or maces alongside firearms is a blast, and switching your build over to, say, wizardry definitely helps to freshen things up a bit. Your basic wand attacks makes it feel like you're playing dark fantasy Harry Potter, the flick of casting magic bolts is incredibly snappy, and the sound effects are crisp and punchy. And then we have the peak mechanical highlight, which is the elemental interaction, like freezing a skeleton solid with a frost spell and then shattering them into a million pieces, which feels pretty sweet. The game also handles resistances pretty well, physical weapons do next to nothing against skeletal enemies, which forces you to rotate to magic to deal real damage. But the moment you start to enjoy this combat, the structural exhaustion starts to set in soon enough. At some point I noticed that the map somehow didn't feel like an open world. It feels like a secluded, tight arcade arena packed with invisible walls. Then you wander off the beaten path, discover a hidden spider's nest, clear out the webs, only to find 0 loot inside, which happens pretty often. And then there are the bears. Why are there so many bears? You know, for a wild exotic frontier, Obsidian ran out of enemy variety incredibly fast. What, there are bandits, spiders, skeletons, lizards, and bears. Just a lot of bears. At this rate, I'm surprised the Emperor didn't just send a giant jar of honey and a picnic basket to colonize the island. And at this point, I start to feel like the so-called open world doesn't feel grand, and it doesn't feel alive, which is ironic considering the amount of nature surrounding you from every direction. And by the time you set up your party camp to rest, well, that's when the whiplash fully snaps at you. The camp workbench is great, allowing you to upgrade your weapons, armor, and so on, and they give you a mirror so you can change your looks on the fly, which I highly appreciate. But standing around the campfire chatting with Garrus, a bizarre and frankly rare feeling started to creep over me. A feeling I generally don't get when I typically sit down with a new RPG. I'm bored and Sleepy? As I'm trying to stay awake, Garrus tries his best to explain the history of the Dream Scourge before giving me a weirdly intense night envoy and sending me to sleep. Speaking of sleep, by around hour 5, well, that's when my brain clocked out for the day, which almost never happens. You see, it dawned on me that Avowed felt like a very surface-level RPG. The depth that is actually present is strictly tied to the combat loop and weapon variety, but almost nowhere else. You may have noticed that there's barely any mention of dialogue in this video, and that's because all of it has been entirely forgettable. It feels like a game made by a handful of people messing around with the Unreal Engine, and it makes total sense why Microsoft lowered the price tag to $50 instead of a premium $70, because this does not feel like an RPG. It's charming if you miss the old school Bethesda jank, but it gets repetitive so quickly that instead of fully engaging my brain, it just made me incredibly sleepy. Now, I wish I could say that I pushed through the entire game for this video. But I'm not gonna lie, if a game is not engaging me after hour 5, I'm out. Time is a precious commodity, and once the realization set in that the next 20 hours were just going to be a loop of frictionless dialogue scenes that not even Garrus Vicarian could save, empty caves, and killing my 45th reskinned bear variant, my brain just completely tapped out. Now, before any Avowed fans gets upset with me here, I will say that if you're someone who actively longs for the old school days of early 2000s Bethesda or classic Obsidian jank, there is a strange nostalgic comfort food element here. But despite some surface level resemblance, it does however not have the depth or reactivity of games like New Vegas, so saying that it is like those beloved gems of old would be an overpromise. But would I say that it's worth it for everyone else in 2026? Well, look, I think the smartest move again was lowering the base price tag of this game because it shifts your expectations. If you find it on a heavy discount, or if you already have it sitting on a Game Pass and you just want a low-stakes casual weekend of flicking magic wands at skeletons in third person, it's a serviceable time killer. Hell, I've seen threads where people praise it endlessly, so hey, you might find yourself your favorite game ever here. And if you're a fan of the Pillars Eternity universe, then you'll probably feel right at home here. I might even at some point down the line feel the sudden urge to boot it back up and actually finish the game. I'm not writing it off forever. But today is definitely not that day. Because in 2026 there are just way too many phenomenal, deep and reactive RPGs out there that are simply far more worth spending your limited time and hard-earned money on. At the end of the day, I don't think Avowed is the most awful game ever. That sentiment is absolutely overblown. It's just an aggressively mediocre experience. Yes, even now despite all the patches and updates, at least I think so. It's got a handful of genuinely great mechanical ideas trapped inside a game design structure that is simply outdated and just not very interesting nor deep. So unless you've got a massive bowl of pasta and an iron will at the start of your session, well, if you're anything like me, it's probably just going to put you right back to sleep. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Mr. Alton, signing off.